When I first saw the flames licking along the wall of the Mir space station, my body froze. We were 400 kilometers above Earth, 6 people inside a metal can older than some of my crewmates. A place that smells like metal, sweat, and old electronics. Every fan hum, every beep becomes familiar. You know your environment so well that anything out of place hits your brain like a hammer. And that morning, something was wrong. It had started like any other day. I was floating in the Spectre module, trying to fix a stubborn cable that had shorted out the night before. Jerry Lininger, our American guest from NASA, was floating past me, trying not to get in the way, joking about how the Russian hospitality included fixing your own room. The air felt heavier. A burnt smell, sharp and acidic, drifted into my nose. It was faint at first. I thought it was just one of the old power supplies overheating again. Mir had a talent for those kinds of surprises. Then I heard the fire alarm. That sound is unmistakable, a rising, mechanical scream. The kind that rips through your chest. My heart rate jumped immediately. Jerry and I exchanged a look, not panic yet, but serious. No joking now. We pushed off the walls, floating quickly toward the main module, core, where the signal was coming from. And then I saw it. The solid fuel oxygen canister, the one we had activated just minutes earlier to top up the air, it had exploded into fire. Not sparks. Not smoke. Actual flames, a jet almost a meter long, hissing and flickering in the microgravity like a blowtorch from hell. We'd used these candles before. They burn iron and lithium perchlorate to produce oxygen. Reliable. Cheap. Soviet. And sometimes, unpredictable. I remember staring for a moment too long. Fire isn't supposed to behave like that in space. It doesn't dance upwards, it forms this floating, expanding ball of plasma, reaching outward in all directions, feeding off anything it can find. This one was pinned to the wall, shooting sideways, right at the hatch to the Soyuz escape capsule, our lifeboat. The smell hit me full force then, acrid smoke, burning insulation, that terrifying mix of chemicals and heat that tells every fiber in your body, get out, now. Only there was nowhere to go. I tried to reach the Soyuz. That was my first instinct. If things went wrong, really wrong, we'd need to evacuate. But the flame was shooting straight across the module, and the hatch to the Soyuz capsule was directly in its path. We had just 90 seconds before the fire could eat through wires, insulation, even the hull if it got hot enough. We couldn't open the hatch without diving through the inferno. Vasily Tsibliev, our commander, barked, "Alexander, get the extinguisher, now." I kicked off the wall, floated fast toward the opposite end of the core module. Everything felt slow. Sounds were muffled, except the hissing of that fire, like a gas leak from hell. Sparks spat across the air. Small glowing bits drifted toward the ceiling like deadly snowflakes. Jerry Lininger shouted from behind me, "The smoke's getting worse." We weren't wearing oxygen masks. We weren't in suits. We were just in t-shirts and pants, floating in a smoke-filled steel can, trying not to inhale burning lithium and plastic. I grabbed the first extinguisher, it was strapped near the control panel. Yanked it off. Vasily was already floating near the flame, shielding his face with one arm. The fire didn't flinch. We hit it with the extinguisher. A cloud of yellow-white powder exploded into the module, blinding, suffocating. It coated the walls, the windows, our clothes. We couldn't see the flame anymore, but we could still hear it, feel its heat. Then I realized, the first extinguisher wasn't enough. It sputtered out after just seconds. Vasily grabbed another. Jerry was helping Sasha Lazutkin, me, position near the side, shouting, "If this spreads, we're done." Somewhere in the smoke, I heard one of the German cosmonauts cough hard, like he was choking. The fire kept roaring. The solid fuel candle was embedded in a steel box. The flames were shooting through holes in the box, the entire unit had ruptured. And still, The hatch to the escape vehicle was unreachable. Smoke was thick now. My eyes were watering. The heat was bouncing off the walls. For a second, I thought about my daughter. She was 6. I saw her face so vividly it startled me. What would she think, losing her father to a fire in space? Jerry floated by again, mask now on. He had one of the emergency oxygen packs clipped to his chest. He shouted through the smoke, "If this spreads to the wiring." We all knew what would happen. The fire would follow the cables, straight into the Spectre module. That's where most of our equipment was. Power systems, data. But worse, Spectre had a punctured hull from a collision months ago. If the fire reached it, and reignited any pressurized oxygen, it could breach the entire station. We needed to stop it. Now. The smoke was thick enough that I couldn't see Vasily's face, even though he was less than a meter away from me. My eyes stung, and every breath burned. We'd already gone through 2 fire extinguishers, and the flame was still going. Jerry had managed to find an oxygen mask and was yelling something, but the sound was drowned out by the hissing fire and the rapid clanging of floating tools bouncing off the walls. I grabbed the 3rd extinguisher. It was strapped near the airlock. As I tore it free, my hand brushed one of the emergency oxygen packs. There were only a handful on board. I clipped it on and fumbled with the mask. The strap caught on my headset. For a second, I floated there, trying to untangle the mess on my face while smoke crept deeper into my lungs. Vasily yelled again, coughing as he did. "Use it. Now." I finally got the mask secured and aimed the extinguisher at the base of the flame. Another cloud of powder burst out, surrounding the module in a thick fog. The fire dimmed, but it didn't go out. It was like the fuel inside the canister had its own will, feeding itself no matter what we threw at it. At that point, we realized something critical. The fire had already melted part of the mounting structure. Pieces were floating, bits of scorched plastic, metal shards, insulation. I reached out instinctively to swat something away and instantly regretted it. My glove brushed a metal edge that was still red-hot. The pain shot through my hand and up my arm. I pulled back and yelled, not even realizing I'd let go of the extinguisher in the process. It spun slowly away, bumping against a bulkhead. For a second, all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing inside the mask, shallow and fast. Vasily managed to suppress the flame just enough that it stopped growing, but the canister was still venting heat and smoke. He turned to me, his voice low but hard, "We can't stay in here." I looked past him. The hatch to the Soyuz was still blocked. That was our escape vehicle. Our lifeboat. We couldn't get through without going through the worst of the fire. "What about Kvant 2? I asked. "The other Soyuz is docked there." He shook his head. "We'd never get everyone through in time. And the airlocks, if we vent one, we isolate the station. That meant no power, no control, no comms. Cutting off any module could cause a system-wide failure. We had to stay and fight." At that moment, Valery Korzun, one of the backup cosmonauts, floated into the module from Priroda. His face was pale, and he had his shirt pulled over his mouth. He passed another oxygen pack to Jerry, who clipped it on immediately. The two of them tried to clear the air with the ventilation fans, but those weren't designed for this volume of smoke. The filters were clogging. We knew that if the onboard systems went offline because of overheating or smoke intrusion, we'd lose guidance. And if we lost guidance, we'd lose orientation, no solar power, no communications, no stabilization. We'd be drifting blind. I yelled to Vasily, "We need to isolate the fire." He nodded, then pointed toward the panel where the canister was mounted. We were going to remove it, or what was left of it, from the wall. Getting close was hell. Even with gloves, you could feel the heat radiating from the metal. Vasily used a small spanner to start unscrewing the brackets. Each twist sent flakes of blackened metal into the air. I hovered behind him, holding a plastic bag. It was all we had to catch the debris. The moment the last bolt came loose, the entire bracket assembly floated free, still smoking. Vasily guided it into the bag, and we sealed it with a clip. The fire was out, but the danger wasn't. The smoke was now everywhere, thick enough that even with the fans at full power, visibility was down to less than a meter. We couldn't see the ceiling. All the lights were covered in extinguisher powder and residue. It felt like we were floating inside a dark, hot cloud. Then came the worst sound we'd heard all day, a sharp beep from the environmental monitor. CO2 levels had spiked. The fire had consumed oxygen, and now we were breathing in the leftovers. If the levels kept rising, we'd start to black out. We activated every emergency air scrubber we had. The LIOH canisters started hissing as they kicked in, drawing in smoke and venting filtered air. But the station wasn't designed for a full module fire. Every minute mattered. I floated to the comms panel and opened a line to Moscow. The voice on the other end was calm, but I could tell they understood how bad it was. Report status. I looked around. Fire is out, I said. Smoke level critical. Air quality borderline. 1 injured. Continuing filtration. There was silence for a few seconds, then, acknowledged. Keep scrubbers running. Monitor oxygen pressure. Do not re-enter Spectre or Kvant 1. We'll advise. I floated back to Vasily and Jerry. They were both slumped against the wall, masks on, faces soaked with sweat. Vasily looked at me and said quietly, "We got lucky." I didn't feel lucky. I felt scorched, shaken, and exhausted. But we were still alive. It took almost 20 minutes before the smoke started to thin enough that we could see each other without masks. The powder from the extinguishers was caked onto every surface, floors, walls, equipment, even the windows. The fans kept circulating the residue, so no matter how long we floated, it felt like we were breathing through chalk. Jerry and I were still in masks, and so was Vasily, but we had limited oxygen. There were only 5 or 6 emergency packs on board, and none were designed for long use. Valery had taken off his mask earlier, just for a moment, and coughed so hard he nearly vomited. That told us the scrubbers weren't catching up fast enough. The system was overloaded. We met near the node, the connecting module that linked core with Kvant 1 and the other compartments. Everyone was tense, not talking unless absolutely necessary. Jerry broke the silence. We need to check the O2 pressure. If that fire ate too much, we might not have enough to stay on board. I nodded and pushed off toward the control panel. The indicator lights were flickering slightly, not from power issues, but from the dust that had gotten inside the contact surfaces. I checked the display twice. We're low, but not critical, I said. Still dropping, though. Slowly. That meant the candle had burned a lot more oxygen than it should have before we stopped it. Combined with the venting during the firefight, the cabin pressure was down. We'd need to generate more soon, or start powering down systems to reduce consumption. Vasily joined us with a folded paper check sheet. He had smoke stains on his face and arms, and one side of his shirt was scorched. We won't activate another canister, he said firmly. Not until we know why that one failed. Jerry nodded. Agreed. We can survive on backup for a while. I knew what that meant: reduce activity, slow movements, breathe as little as possible. We were being told to wait it out, conserve energy, and not make any more mistakes. It was a terrible plan, but we didn't have a better one. We took turns scrubbing the interior surfaces with alcohol wipes, trying to remove the chemical residue before it clogged more systems. It was like trying to clean a flooded apartment with a sponge. The powder had found its way into everything. Fans, vents, connectors, meal trays, even the handles we used to stabilize ourselves. After 2 hours of work, it felt like we had made no progress at all. Jerry was wiping down the medical cabinet when he stopped and floated back, holding his nose. "The filters are saturated," he said. "They're just moving the same crap around." Vasily looked at the onboard environment panel again. The numbers had stabilized but weren't improving. "We isolate the module," he said. "Core stays sealed. We move to Kvant and Priroda. Shut core down. Let it vent passively." That was a huge call. Core was the central hub of the station, the passage point for every module. If we sealed it, we'd lose access to half our systems. But leaving it open meant we'd keep breathing contaminated air. Vasily wasn't asking for a vote. He started prepping the hatches. I helped him tighten the seals, careful not to damage the rubber insulation. Every time we locked a hatch, it made a soft click that felt final. When the last one was shut, the air suddenly felt heavier. The fans were quieter in the new compartment, and we could hear each other breathing. We floated for a while in silence. Jerry looked over at me. "Your hand okay?" I had forgotten about the burn. I pulled my glove off and checked. The skin was red and starting to blister, but it wasn't deep. "I'll live," I said. He smiled faintly. "You know, I trained for every scenario: depressurization, collision, power loss." No one said anything about a candle blowing up. Vasily said nothing. He just stared at the hatch to core, eyes fixed. I think he was calculating failure paths. What else could have gone wrong, what still might? We radioed Moscow again. I gave the report this time. "Core module sealed. Fire out. Filters saturated. Minimal O2 generation. Crew status, stable. Injuries, 1 minor." Ground control acknowledged, then told us not to attempt any new oxygen generation until further notice. They wanted time to analyze the data. I asked the operator if they had seen anything like this before. His voice was flat, not on orbit. "No previous malfunction recorded of this type. Do not attempt repair. Stand by." That was the first time I realized they had no answers either. We weren't just dealing with a known failure. This was new. A design flaw, a reaction they hadn't anticipated, something that had slipped through years of testing and flight time. And we had 6 more of those canisters on board. Later, when we were alone, Vasily floated near me and asked, "If it happens again, and we can't get to Soyuz, what then?" I said nothing. We both knew the answer. No Soyuz meant no escape. And no core meant no access to the main Soyuz, even if we needed it. We ate in silence that evening. Pouches of reheated soup and bread in plastic wrap. My appetite was gone, but I forced myself to finish. I kept thinking about the smell. Even though the smoke was mostly gone, the scent of burnt lithium and scorched plastic had settled into the walls, the clothing, our hair. I knew it wouldn't come out, not even after we landed. It would stay in the fabric forever. We floated near the porthole and stared out at Earth. Bright blue oceans, clouds swirling across continents, cities glowing in the night. None of it felt close. Jerry said quietly, "This thing could have gone another way." I nodded. It still might. 3 days passed before ground control allowed us to re-enter the core module. We hadn't heard back from them about the root cause of the failure, only that they were still reviewing the telemetry and that the oxidizer pressure curve from the failed canister was unexpected. No one was willing to say what exactly went wrong. In the meantime, the carbon dioxide levels in Kvant were rising slowly. The lithium hydroxide scrubbers were doing what they could, but the filters had degraded from the exposure to the firefighting agent, and there were only so many spares. Food wasn't a problem, and neither was power, but air was becoming the one thing we couldn't stretch much further. We didn't say it out loud, but we all knew the obvious solution was to restart oxygen generation. That meant using another solid fuel oxygen canister. The same type that had almost killed us. When the instruction came from Moscow, it was short and clear. Deploy 1 SFOG unit. Location, Prirota. Maximum crew separation. Fire suppression on standby. Monitor burn behavior continuously. Abort if abnormal. Vasily stared at the message for a long time before he responded. Understood. Will proceed as directed. Then he turned to me. I want you and Jerry on the far end of the station. Valerie and I will deploy the unit. Pavel stays near the Soyuz. If this goes wrong again, we isolate the module and evacuate. I didn't argue. We all knew the risks. But waiting longer would mean breathing less and working slower, and that couldn't continue. We floated to Prirota and reviewed the deployment checklist again, even though we all knew it by heart. The canister looked the same as the others: silver cylinder, safety pin, activation tab. It had a sharp chemical smell even before ignition, something like rust and cleaning fluid. Vasily clipped it into the wall mount and secured the bracket, double-checking the latch. Valerie stood by with a new extinguisher, gloves on, eyes locked on the flame port. I had one of the fans aimed at the ceiling to start circulation. We gave the go to Moscow. SFOG ready for ignition. Safety confirmed. All crew in position. The response came instantly. Proceed. Vasily pulled the activation tab. A short delay, maybe 2 seconds, then the hiss. A small, controlled flame appeared at the nozzle, much smaller than the one from the failed unit. It burned with a steady glow, no sparks, no pressure spike, no burst. We all stared at it in silence for a full minute, watching for any change in shape or color. Jerry radioed from the opposite module. No pressure anomalies. O2 rising within normal rate. Valerie didn't even blink. Vasily slowly exhaled and turned to me. It's stable. I nodded, but I didn't relax. Not even after the flames self-extinguished 20 minutes later. The station didn't explode, and we didn't suffocate, but none of us trusted the canisters anymore. We ran diagnostics afterward, collecting air samples, logging thermal readings, writing down every single noise or vibration we noticed during the burn. Moscow wanted to know how it behaved compared to the failed one, but the truth was, it gave us nothing useful. This one had worked exactly as expected. No difference in pressure curves, no temperature spikes, no signs of leakage or combustion outside the nozzle. It looked like the bad unit was just that, bad. 1 out of hundreds. We had gotten unlucky. Vasily said what we were all thinking. So next time, we might get unlucky again. No one replied. The next day, we had a video call with a team of engineers from TSUP. It was a rare face-to-face link. They asked us to describe the moment of ignition, the way the flame looked, the way the canister sounded, even the smell. Vasily answered most of the questions. I just watched the faces of the people on the screen. They looked tired and frustrated. One of the older engineers finally admitted, there's no evidence of a systemic flaw. All units passed pressure testing pre-flight. We think the inner casing on that canister was damaged during launch or handling. Jerry asked, so what's the mitigation? The engineer paused, then said, handle with care. Mount securely. Monitor every second. That was it. That was our plan. Use the same system, but be more careful. As if watching it harder would make it safer. Life on board slowly returned to routine. We slept, we exercised, we ran experiments. But something had shifted. Every time one of us passed the storage rack where the canisters were kept, we glanced at them like they were live grenades. Even opening the lockers had attention to it. Valerie joked once, we should label them all, for enemies only, but no one laughed. We continued to use them, 1 per day, sometimes 2, but never without someone on standby with an extinguisher and a second person near the hatch. We never relaxed during a burn. It was like holding your breath next to a lit match. A week later, I found some of the powder residue still lodged behind a ventilation grill near Kvant. I scraped it out with a cotton swab and sealed it in a plastic bag. When I handed it to Vasily, he looked at it for a moment and said, "Send it to Earth. Let them smell what it's like up here." Then he stuffed it into the return pouch for the next Progress cargo ship. I didn't ask if he was joking. I wasn't sure he was. We kept waiting for an official explanation from Moscow, something that would give closure, or at least a reason we could believe in. Weeks passed. More canisters were used, more samples were sent back, and more data was collected. The engineers gave us a dozen possible causes: minor damage to the casing, rare impurity in the oxidizer mix, a misaligned mounting bracket, but nothing definitive. No one could say why that specific candle ruptured. It became one of those cases where the people on the ground said it was a one-off incident, while those of us on board had to keep living next to the same equipment, knowing there was no guarantee it wouldn't happen again. When we asked for a replacement system or a redesign, the answer was always the same: not in time for your mission. For the rest of our time aboard Mir, we kept using the same oxygen generators, each time knowing full well what could happen. A month after the fire, we opened the core module again for full cleaning and inspection. The walls were still stained in places. We wiped them down as best we could with alcohol rags, but some parts were permanently discolored. The scorched panel where the canister had failed had warped slightly from the heat. A few of the cable bundles nearby had melted insulation, which had to be rewrapped with spare shielding. I found fragments of burnt plastic still wedged behind the equipment rack, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. Jerry floated in as I was scraping some of it out with a screwdriver. "Still smells like an old toaster in here," he said. I nodded and kept working. It was strange, by then we were functioning again as a crew, back into routine, checking experiments, logging data, but no one ever sat casually in core anymore. If you didn't have to be there, you stayed somewhere else. There was a conversation we had one night when the station lights were dimmed for sleep. We were floating in Kvant 2, strapped into our sleeping bags, but none of us were sleeping. The air was too dry, and the fans were humming louder than usual. Jerry asked quietly, "You think if that hatch had jammed, we'd be done?" Vasily didn't answer immediately. After a while, he said, "Yes." No emotion, no drama, just a fact. I added, "If the second extinguisher hadn't worked, it would have reached the cables. Maybe shorted the main bus." Jerry asked, "Would that have caused a decompression?" I answered, "Probably not. But no power, no orientation, no comms. No chance." The silence after that lasted a long time. There are some things you can say to your crewmates that you would never repeat later in interviews or debriefs. There's no use in making them official. You just acknowledge them, quietly, and keep going. The next Progress ship brought new oxygen candles, same design, but supposedly from a different batch. There was a new safety procedure included: check the exterior casing for dents before use, confirm serial number, document condition. A small piece of paper inside the box said, "Handle with care. Do not install with force." As if a few extra sentences could prevent combustion at the wrong time. We logged each canister we used, photographed it before and after, sent the images back to Earth. That was now part of our daily job. Not just conducting science or maintaining systems, but documenting every step of staying alive in a structure where age, wear, and stress had become routine. When my return flight finally came, it felt more like extraction than a conclusion. The Soyuz descent was rough but uneventful. Re-entry slammed into me like it always did, gravity returning with a suddenness that felt unfair. Back on Earth, they pulled me out of the capsule, and I blinked in the bright light like I'd forgotten what sky looked like. My daughter was taller. I didn't say much to her about the fire. I said there had been a small incident, but everything was fine. She was 6. There was no need for her to know we'd nearly died that day, or that it might happen again to someone else. The investigators from the space agency wanted statements. I told them what happened, step by step. They wrote everything down, nodded, said they were grateful. They asked if I thought the candles should be replaced. I said yes. They said they would evaluate the options. That was the last I heard about it. Looking back, I don't remember the fear as much as I remember the silence after. The station didn't feel haunted, but it felt tense, like it was holding something inside that hadn't fully settled. Every time a fan made a new sound, or a light flickered unexpectedly, I caught myself holding my breath. I don't think I ever completely relaxed on Mir again. But we did what we were there to do. We stayed, we repaired, we continued the work. And when the next crew arrived, we didn't tell them every detail. We showed them how to use the extinguisher, how to mount the canisters, how to check the seal on the hatch. The rest they would learn on their own, if they had to. Some time later, I read a report that said the design of the oxygen generator had finally been changed. Not because of our incident, but due to long-term planning for newer modules. I wondered if the engineer who made the change ever knew how close we'd come. Probably not. He was likely just doing his job, improving what he could, like we all did. There's no marker for that failed canister. No plaque, no monument. Just a burned bracket, floating in a plastic bag inside a drawer on Earth somewhere, and a few men who remember exactly how long a fire can burn in orbit before it kills everyone.